Courtroom number 2 carried the heavy hush of a place where life-changing decisions were made. Reporters lined the gallery, with cameras poised, waiting for the final chapter of a billionaire's marriage to close. Juliet sat at the defense table, her bracelet trembling slightly each time she exhaled. Theodore Maxwell sat beside her, posture straight, jaw set, expression unreadable except for the steady focus in his eyes. Judge Randall lifted his gavel, ready to begin. Lawyers exchanged stiff nods, flipping files open. The clerk cleared his throat and announced, "Final hearing for the Maxwell divorce." Juliet gripped the side of her chair. Theodore adjusted his tie, preparing for the moment he believed would set his future in place. Juliet would soon become Mrs. Maxwell. They had rehearsed this day in their minds for months. Judge Randall leaned forward. This court, boom! The sharp sound echoed as the courtroom doors flew open. Every head turned. Megan walked in, dark hair framing her determined face, one arm wrapped securely around baby Chris. He rested on her hip in a tiny sailor suit, eyes half closed as he fought sleep. The small sound he made, a soft, tired whimper, cut straight through the courtroom noise. Gasps spread quickly. Cameras snapped without hesitation. Even the attorneys paused, unsure of what they were looking at. Juliet's hand flew to her mouth. Theodore blinked once, then again, disbelief settling across his face like lightning striking without warning. Megan stepped forward, shoulders straight, chin lifted with a quiet courage that filled the room. She raised a folded document high enough for the judge to see. Her voice carried across the space without hesitation. "Your Honor, this is Chris. He is Theodore Maxwell's son." The words dropped into the courtroom with the force of a landslide. Reporters whispered frantically, fumbling for better angles. Juliet's knees weakened. She caught herself on the table. Theodore's heartbeat hammered in his chest, each beat louder than the last. Judge Randall slammed his gavel. Order, order. But nothing could stop the shock that had already swept through every corner of courtroom number 2. The intense silence in courtroom number 2 seemed to echo long after Megan's words settled in the air. People were still frozen in their seats, unsure if they had witnessed a confession, an accusation, or the beginning of something even bigger. Juliet's fingers shook as they clung to the edge of the table. Theodore didn't move at all, not a breath, not a blink, as he stared at the child he never expected to see today. But before the judge could speak again, before the reporters could regain composure, before Juliet's trembling whisper could find sound. Welcome back to Mr. Graham Stories, where life's most powerful lessons come wrapped in unforgettable tales. If you're new to this family, thank you for joining us. Please hit the subscribe button because it helps us share stories like this across YouTube. Now, let's talk about what just happened, because moments like these don't simply enter a courtroom, they enter the heart. Have you ever tried to move on from someone, only for the past to walk in holding everything you've been avoiding? Have you ever thought you were finally starting a new life, only for reality to land in your lap like a ticking time bomb? Have you ever kept something to yourself to protect your heart, only to watch that silence cost you more than you ever planned to lose? Secrets, choices, mistakes, they don't disappear just because we hide them. Eventually they knock on the door, sometimes holding a child. The tension inside courtroom number 2 returned like a rising tide, slow, heavy, impossible to ignore. Judge Randall adjusted his glasses, eyes narrowing as he studied the young woman holding a baby who looked far too calm for the weight of the moment. Megan didn't flinch. She stood tall, the folded birth certificate still raised, her other arm wrapped firmly around Chris. The little sailor suit he wore seemed almost symbolic, innocent, clean, untouched by the chaos surrounding him. His tiny fingers held the edge of Megan's dress, unaware that hundreds of eyes were glued to him. Judge Randall cleared his throat, cutting through the murmurs. "Ms. Richardson," he said slowly, "you are making a very serious claim." Megan nodded once. "I know, Your Honor." The judge shifted his attention to Theodore. The billionaire CEO who commanded boardrooms, signed global contracts, and moved markets, now looked like a man stripped of every shield he owned. "Mr. Maxwell," Judge Randall said, voice firm but measured, "is this child yours?" A ripple of voices broke out across the gallery. Reporters leaned forward as though gravity itself had tilted them closer. Juliet's breath hitched so sharply she had to grip the table to stay upright. Megan stepped closer to the witness stand, her heels tapping softly against the polished floor. She placed Chris gently on the table where everyone, the judge, the attorneys, Juliet, and finally Theodore, could see him clearly. Chris blinked sleepily, rubbed his eyes, and then looked straight at Theodore. The resemblance was undeniable. The same gentle frown when concentrating. The same way of tilting his head when curious. Theodore's hand trembled as he reached out. He hesitated, not because he doubted, but because touching this child meant acknowledging everything he had avoided for nearly 2 years. Slowly, he lifted Chris into his arms. The baby settled against him without fear, tiny fingers curling into the fabric of Theodore's suit, his son. Juliet covered her mouth, a choked sound slipping out. She swayed and caught the bench for support as flashing lights burst from reporters scrambling for photos. Theodore swallowed hard. His voice, usually steady and authoritative, came out shaped by emotion he couldn't hide. Yes, his breath caught. "He's my son," gasps, shouts. It was the moment everything broke and everything began. In that single moment, this billionaire CEO didn't just lose a fiancé, he gained a truth that would change every heartbeat of his future. This wasn't just a courtroom shock. It was a reckoning, the kind that reshapes lives, rewrites destinies, and forces every person involved to confront who they truly are. The courtroom trembled with noise. Reporters yelling questions, camera shutters flashing, Juliet sobbing into trembling hands, and attorneys scrambling to regain order. Through it all, Theodore held Chris against his chest, his eyes wide with shock, guilt, and something deeper he couldn't name. Judge Randall hammered the gavel again and again, but nothing could quiet what had already erupted. The truth was out. Lives had shifted. Futures had collided. Before we continue, please like this video so YouTube shows it to more people. It truly helps this channel grow. Go ahead and tap that like button now. The scene holds on Theodore standing frozen with his son in his arms, a man who built empires now undone by a single whispered truth. Now, stay with me, because what you're about to witness is more than a courtroom interruption. It's a turning point, a moment where truth, heartbreak, and unexpected family collide in a way no one in that room was prepared for. And trust me, what happens after this moment? That's where the real story begins, because from this point on, nothing in Theodore Maxwell's life would ever return to the way it was before. Courtroom number 2 had never held its breath the way it did after Megan stepped through those double doors. The polished floor caught the light as she crossed the threshold, baby Chris resting on her hip, his small sailor suit softening the edge of a moment that was anything but gentle. Reporters jerked upright, hands flying to their cameras as if instinct alone told them history was being made right in front of them. Judge Randall froze mid-sentence, eyes narrowing in confusion as Megan moved farther into the room. Juliet's bracelet slid halfway down her wrist from how violently her hand trembled. She looked from Megan to Theodore, her face draining of every shade of confidence she walked into the courthouse with. Theodore himself couldn't move. His jaw tightened, eyes sharpening as if the world had just shifted its weight onto his shoulders. And then Chris let out that soft, sleepy whimper, the sound that sliced the air like truth itself. For a moment, only the hum of electricity filled the room, like the courthouse itself needed a second to understand what had just walked in. Megan inhaled deeply, raised the document in her hand, and spoke in the same steady voice from the hook. "Your Honor, this is Chris. He is Theodore Maxwell's son." The room didn't just react, it detonated. Voices erupted from every row, reporters scrambling for angles, lenses stretching forward as if they could pull the truth straight out of Theodore's stunned expression. Juliet swayed so hard she had to grip the table with both hands, her knuckles whitening. Her eyes darted to Theodore, searching, pleading, terrified. Theodore's pulse hammered, his breath slipped shallow and uneven. He had anticipated a clean divorce, a signature, a future he believed was secure. Nothing in his world had prepared him for the weight of a child being placed at his feet in front of the entire city. Judge Randall slammed his gavel. "Order, order in this court." But the reporters could not contain themselves. Security moved in swiftly, creating a barrier between the media and the 3 people now at the center of the storm: Theodore, Megan, and the small boy whose presence had rewritten the day. "Clear the aisle," one officer barked. "Step back from the table," shouted another. Megan walked forward with a courage that came from 2 years of fighting through long nights alone. She adjusted Chris gently, kissing the top of his head before shifting him higher on her hip. Chris blinked at the bright lights and strangers, fingers wrapped around the soft ear of his stuffed bear. Juliet covered her mouth, her breathing ragged. "Theo, tell me this isn't real," she whispered, barely audible over the chaos. Theodore couldn't respond. His eyes were locked on Chris, the tiny dimple in his cheek, the familiar arch of his eyebrows, the way he tilted his head, just like he did when curious. Judge Randall raised his voice. "Miss Richardson, please step forward." Megan did. Security closed the gap behind her, guiding reporters farther back. Juliet's lawyer tried to regain composure, flipping through files as if searching for an escape that didn't exist. Veronica Maxwell, Theodore's ex-wife, sat at the plaintiff's table, frozen in shock but undeniably fascinated. Judge Randall leaned forward. "Miss Richardson, you understand the seriousness of this?" "Yes, Your Honor," she said firmly. "But the truth is standing right here." Chris looked at the judge, then at Theodore again, his lips forming a tiny "da," before fading into a soft babble. It was too much for Juliet. "No." She choked, stumbling backward. "No, Theo, you promised me. You told me there were no secrets left between us." "Juliet, I didn't know," Theodore said, voice raw, the first full sentence he had managed since Megan walked in. "You didn't know?" Juliet repeated, her voice cracking as she turned away. "You didn't know you had a child?" Her knees buckled. A nearby bailiff rushed to steady her before she collapsed to the floor. She pressed both hands to her face, tears spilling through her fingers. Theodore took a step toward her, but Judge Randall stopped him sharply. "Mr. Maxwell, stay where you are." The courtroom grew quiet again, tension thick enough to press on every chest. Judge Randall exhaled slowly, weighing each word. "Given the unexpected nature of this development, this court cannot proceed with the divorce until we verify all claims." He glanced at Theodore. "This matter is far from simple." Reporters scribbled notes so quickly their pens squeaked. Megan shifted her weight, patting Chris's back as he curled his fingers into her dress. Theodore's eyes flickered. Guilt, shock, something like awe, but he couldn't look away from the child. "Ms. Richardson," Judge Randall said, "you will remain available for questioning. Mr. Maxwell, you will provide immediate documentation requested by this court." "Yes, Your Honor," Theodore murmured, still unable to break his gaze away from Chris. Security began escorting the public out of the room, controlling the flood of noise that threatened to overtake the proceedings. As the crowd thinned, Theodore stepped forward hesitantly. "Megan." His voice cracked just around the edges. "Let me see him." Her expression softened only slightly. She shifted Chris toward Theodore, giving him room to move closer. He reached out, fingers trembling, as if afraid touching the boy would make the moment too real. Chris stretched a hand toward him, curious, trusting, and touched the lapel of Theodore's suit. Theodore inhaled sharply, overwhelmed by a connection he could neither deny nor articulate. Juliet, watching from the corner with tear-filled eyes, whispered a single broken question. "How long? If you're watching this unfold, and your heart is already racing, don't forget to like this video. It helps our channel grow and brings more stories like this to the world. Now let's continue." Theodore held onto the table for balance, staring at the child who mirrored pieces of him he never knew he had left in the world. The judge's decision echoed in the silent courtroom. "This hearing is adjourned," and with a final bang of the gavel, their lives spun into a direction none of them had imagined. The hallway outside courtroom number 2 buzzed with tension so sharp it felt like it clung to the walls. Reporters stood behind a line of security officers, still trying to snap photos through the glass as the crowd spilled into the corridor. Even the normally calm courthouse staff looked unsettled, whispering to each other as they passed. Juliet stumbled into the hallway with one hand clutching the wall for balance. Her pale silk dress looked too delicate for the storm tearing through her chest. Her makeup, flawless an hour ago, now streaked faintly beneath her eyes. She struggled to breathe evenly. Each breath came out shallow, uneven. Theodore, she managed, voice trembling. Theodore followed slowly behind her, still caught in the shock of holding Chris moments earlier. His steps were hesitant, almost reluctant, as if each one brought him closer to a truth he wasn't ready to face. "Juliet, please," he said softly, reaching out a hand. She jerked her arm away. "Don't touch me," her voice cracked. "Not after what I just saw." Her back hit the wall as she pressed herself against it, clutching her chest like she needed something to keep her upright. She stared at him with a mixture of disbelief, betrayal, and pain that made the hallway feel colder. "You told me," she whispered, voice tightening. "You told me you had no secrets left. You told me we were starting clean." "I didn't know," Theodore insisted, taking one step closer. "Juliet, I swear to you." "You didn't know?" she repeated, laughter bubbling out in a broken, disbelieving sound. "You didn't know you had a child?" Theodore flinched. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. How could he explain something he barely understood himself? Juliet pressed her palms to her face, sliding down the wall until she landed on the bench nearby. Her shoulders shook with quiet sobs. People passing by slowed to watch, but were ushered away by security. The courthouse was used to emotional moments, but nothing like the reveal of a billionaire's hidden child. Megan stood a short distance away, rocking Chris gently as he slept on her shoulder, unaware of the chaos. She watched Juliet with a mixture of sympathy and resolve. She hadn't come here to destroy a woman's life, but she couldn't deny the truth her son deserved. Theodore looked between Megan and Juliet, torn by the weight of everything collapsing at once. Juliet wiped her tears, swallowing hard before speaking again. "So while I was planning our wedding, while I was choosing flowers and venues, you had a child out there? A whole child, Theodore?" "It wasn't like that," he said weakly. "Then tell me," she demanded, eyes burning. "What was it like?" Before he could answer, Judge Randall's assistant stepped into the hallway. "Miss Richardson," he called, glancing toward Megan. "The judge would like to speak with you privately." Megan nodded, shifting Chris in her arms as she stepped toward the assistant. But Juliet snapped her gaze toward her, something fierce and desperate flashing behind her eyes. "You," Juliet said, voice trembling but sharp. "You destroyed my engagement." Megan held her ground, adjusting Chris to rest more comfortably against her. Her voice stayed calm. "I didn't come here to ruin your life. I came here because my son deserves his father. That's all." Juliet's gaze faltered. Her anger didn't disappear, but grief took its place. "You blindsided me," Juliet whispered. "You blindsided both of us." Megan looked down at Chris for a moment, brushing a curl from his forehead. "I've been raising him alone," she said quietly. "I didn't want to walk in here. I had to." Theodore lowered his head, guilt settling heavily in his shoulders. He couldn't hide the truth any longer. He had spent 2 years convincing himself that the night with Megan had been a moment swept away by circumstances, something he could bury. But watching Juliet crumble in front of him now, watching Megan cradle the child who carried his smile, he realized how deeply his silence had hurt everyone involved. The assistant gestured again. "Miss Richardson, the judge is waiting." Megan followed him toward a small consultation room near the chambers. It was quiet inside, dimmer than the bright courtroom, offering a strange calm after the explosion of drama. Judge Randall stood near the table, glasses in hand. His expression was stern but not unkind. "Miss Richardson," he began, "I need to understand clearly what led you to bring this matter forward today." Megan shifted Chris carefully so he remained nestled on her shoulder. "I didn't want it to come to this," she said truthfully, "but his divorce was happening, and my son, he deserves to know who his father is. I couldn't let today pass without speaking up." "And Mr. Maxwell," the judge asked, "did he know about the child at the time of birth?" Megan shook her head. "He didn't answer my call the day I found out. After that, he never reached out." Judge Randall's jaw tightened slightly, but he nodded. "Do you have documentation?" Megan handed him the birth certificate, along with medical records and photos she had carried with her. The judge reviewed them with slow, meticulous focus. "These records are legitimate," he murmured, setting them carefully on the table. "This is not a matter that can be dismissed." Megan said nothing, only held her sleeping son close. The judge studied her for another long moment. "You've carried a lot alone," he said quietly, "but it ends today. The court will require Mr. Maxwell to participate fully in establishing legal responsibility." Megan exhaled, not relief exactly, but the feeling of a weight shifting. Something long overdue had finally begun. Outside the consultation room, Theodore stood in the hallway, still leaning against the wall as Juliet sat collapsed on the bench, her hands shaking. He heard footsteps approaching and straightened. Megan emerged, her face steady but tired. She didn't look at Juliet, she looked at Theodore. He swallowed hard, eyes flicking to Chris. What did the judge say? Theodore asked. Megan didn't speak for a moment. She simply adjusted Chris, now fully awake and looking curiously between both adults. Then she answered softly, "He said the truth can't be ignored anymore." The words pierced through Theodore's chest. In that moment, something rooted inside him, guilt, responsibility, fear, and something he hadn't allowed himself to feel since seeing his son, the urge to make things right. The hallway outside Judge Randall's chambers had settled into a tense quiet. Reporters had been escorted farther down the corridor, though their cameras still pointed in the direction of the closed courtroom doors like they were waiting for a second explosion. Security officers stood in place, arms folded, watching every movement with the focus of men who had seen enough chaos for one morning. Theodore remained where he was, leaning lightly against the wall, looking like a man caught between two worlds. His engagement had crumbled only minutes ago, yet he couldn't tear his eyes away from Chris, who now clung sleepily to Megan's shoulder after waking from his nap in the judge's consultation room. Chris blinked at Theodore with that innocent curiosity toddlers possessed, his small hand instinctively reaching for the shiny pen clipped to Theodore's suit pocket. The gesture made something deep in Theodore's chest tighten. He had seen many things in his life: mergers, acquisitions, international deals, rising stock values. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared him for the way his own son looked at him. Not fearful, not confused, just open. It softened Theodore in a way he didn't even know was possible. Megan shifted her weight, adjusting Chris so he could settle more comfortably. She watched Theodore carefully, not with hostility, but with the cautiousness of someone who had spent too long expecting disappointment. "Theodore," she said gently, "the judge will contact us later today. This is just the beginning." Her voice carried no accusation, only truth. Theodore inhaled sharply. "Megan," he began, voice uneven, "I need a moment alone with him. Please." The request hung in the air. Juliet, still seated on the bench, wiped her face shakily. She didn't say a word, but her heart seemed to crack louder with every second that passed. Theodore didn't look her way. He couldn't. The damage between them had already been done. Megan held Chris a little closer. "Are you sure?" she asked, her tone gentle but discerning. "Yes," Theodore said, the word leaving him with the weight of a vow. Megan hesitated for the briefest moment, not because she doubted that he was the father. She saw that truth in Chris's very features, but because she had been the only person protecting her child since the day he was born. But when Chris reached for Theodore again, his little hand curling toward him instinctively, that hesitation melted. Megan stepped forward. "All right," she said softly. "You can hold him." She eased Chris into Theodore's arms with a tenderness that startled him. Chris settled against his chest, gripping the lapel of his suit jacket. His warmth, his small weight, his steady breathing. It was real. It wasn't abstract. It wasn't a rumor. It wasn't a maybe. It was his son, his child, a piece of him he had been too afraid to face. Theodore's eyes closed for a moment, as if grounding himself. When he opened them, the world looked different, like someone had wiped away the fog. Chris looked up at him and pressed a tiny palm to his cheek. Theodore's breath caught. "Hey, buddy," he whispered, voice shaking. I'm here." Megan's expression softened despite the heaviness of the day. The sight of Theodore holding Chris, not as a shocked billionaire, not as a man hiding from consequences, but as a father, pulled at something inside her she thought she had buried. Juliet let out a quiet sob from the bench. She rose slowly, hands trembling as she slipped the engagement ring from her finger. The diamond that once symbolized a promising future now felt like it belonged to a story she could no longer stand in. She stepped toward Theodore with quiet dignity. "Theo," she whispered, her voice cracking, "I loved you. I was ready to build a life with you. But I can't stay in something built on silence." Theodore opened his mouth, but Juliet shook her head gently. She had cried enough tears for both of them today. She placed the ring into his free hand, the one not holding Chris. "Take care of him," she said, her voice barely above a breath. "Take care of both of them." Then Juliet turned and walked down the hallway, her figure shrinking with each step until she disappeared around the corner. There was no anger left in her stride now, only heartbreak and acceptance. Theodore stared at the ring in his palm before he closed his hand around it, swallowing hard. He looked up at Megan, eyes heavy with guilt. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "for all of this, for disappearing, for not being there. I convinced myself you didn't want anything to do with me after that night. I was wrong. I handled everything wrong." Megan listened. She didn't interrupt, even though her chest tightened hearing words she never imagined him saying. "Theodore, no," he said quickly, shaking his head. "Let me finish." Chris shifted softly in his arms, gripping his tie now. "I can't go back and fix the years you spent alone," Theodore continued, voice low and raw. "But I promise you this, I'm here now. Not because I'm forced to be, not because the world is watching, but because this is my son, and because you deserve the respect I should have given you from the beginning." Megan exhaled, surprise flickering in her eyes. She hadn't expected this version of Theodore. Not the CEO, not the public figure, but the man beneath all that. A man who finally understood the consequences of the silence he kept. Chris tugged gently at Theodore's tie again, babbling softly. Theodore chuckled, a quiet, almost disbelieving sound, before kissing the top of the boy's head. Megan stepped closer. "We'll figure this out," she said softly. "Together. But one step at a time." Theodore nodded, relief flickering in his features. "Thank you," he murmured, "for giving me that chance." A voice echoed from the end of the hall as security began clearing the last of the reporters. Megan brushed a curl from Chris's forehead and looked Theodore directly in the eyes. "Whatever happens next," she said, "it's for him." Theodore held Chris a little tighter, nodding slowly. Yes, for him, as they began walking toward the exit together, not as enemies, not even as allies yet, but as two parents finally acknowledging the truth. The narrator's voice returned with a gentle closing line for the chapter. Sometimes life collapses in a single moment, but sometimes that same moment becomes the beginning of something new. San Diego's summer sky glowed like a warm lantern the night of the Children's Hospital Charity Gala. Soft waves rolled against the docks behind the Bayside Convention Center, and the building itself shimmered with golden lights. The air carried the scent of sea salt mingled with the faint sweetness of floral centerpieces carried inside by staff preparing for the city's elite. Megan stepped through the staff entrance wearing a simple black dress that hugged her gently without drawing too much attention. She greeted volunteers, handed out instructions, and moved with the calm confidence of someone who always knew how to bring comfort into any room. Her badge read Community Health Educator, but everyone jokingly called her the heart of the gala because she always made sure the pediatric patients felt special. She adjusted a plate of hors d'oeuvres on a table and smiled when she spotted a young boy in a wheelchair holding a superhero toy. She crouched beside him. "You look sharp tonight," she said with a playful grin. The boy blushed, twirling the cape on his toy. "I wanted to dress fancy like the heroes on TV." "That," Megan said, tapping his shoulder, "makes you the fanciest of them all." She stood, smoothing her dress just as the ballroom doors opened again, this time for the keynote speaker. A ripple went through the crowd. Theodore Maxwell, arriving late from a flight, entered the ballroom in a crisp black tuxedo, giving the room a composed smile. He carried the effortless presence of a man used to commanding attention, but tonight he appeared softer, warmer, almost relieved to be somewhere that didn't demand profit margins or board meetings. Their eyes met for a single passing moment, a glance Megan dismissed as accidental. She returned her attention to the tray in her hands. The host introduced Theodore, who stepped onto the stage with confidence. His voice carried clearly as he spoke about the importance of community support for children's health programs. "Success isn't measured by what we take," he said, hands resting lightly on the podium, "but by what we give, especially to children who deserve every chance at life." The applause washed through the room like a wave. Megan clapped, watching him with mild curiosity. He wasn't the arrogant tech billionaire the news often portrayed. Not tonight. After his speech, the donors mingled freely. Megan guided guests, offered small bites of food, and directed families to the children's corner. She overheard snippets of polite conversation, investments, travel plans, charity expansions. But none of it distracted her from her mission of making the night smooth for the families attending. Then a small girl tugged on a sleeve, not Megan's, but Theodore's. "Hi," the girl said shyly, holding up a crayon drawing of a butterfly. "I made this for you." Theodore crouched, accepting the picture as gently as if it were glass. "This is beautiful," he said warmly. "Thank you." He kissed the child's forehead, and the girl giggled before running back to her parents. Megan watched from across the room, surprised at how natural he seemed. For a moment she forgot the spreadsheet version of the man she'd imagined from headlines. She was wiping a table when Theodore approached. "Excuse me," he said, that same easy smile on his face. "I don't think I got your name earlier." Megan turned, still holding a toothpick skewered with melon and prosciutto. "It's Megan," she replied. "And thank you for the smile. Your speech was lovely." "The pleasure's mine," he said, lifting the morsel from her tray. "I usually just write checks, not walk around stealing snacks from the staff." She laughed. "We allow it if you're charming enough." "Oh?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "And am I?" "Not yet," she teased. "But you're getting there." They talked like they had known each other for years. It wasn't forced. It wasn't awkward. It was natural, the kind of connection that didn't happen every day. They shared bits of themselves easily. Megan spoke of growing up with a big church family in San Diego, Sunday dinners, choir practice, her grandmother's famous sweet potato pie. She spoke of wanting to help kids for as long as she could remember. Theodore talked about always moving because of his parents' business, how he never felt settled anywhere, and how he often felt detached from the warmth of community events like this one. "You seem pretty warm now," Megan said softly. He shrugged, smiling. Good company helps. Later that evening, under the glow of string lights on the terrace, they found themselves standing beside each other again. Jazz music floated through the open doors, and the city skyline glittered across the bay. Megan nearly tripped on the hem of her dress, but Theodore caught her elbow quickly. "I got you," he whispered. She laughed, brushing hair behind her ear. "And here I thought I was coordinated. Coordination is overrated," he said. "Moments like these, worth the stumble." Their chemistry simmered in the space between them, unspoken but unmistakable. After the gala, Theodore invited her to join him for a short yacht cruise. At first she hesitated, but the night air, the quiet waves, and the way he looked at her dissolved her doubts. She agreed. The yacht glided across the smooth water, city lights dancing on the waves. Theodore handed her a blanket and poured champagne into 2 plastic flutes. Humble, soft, unexpected. They clinked cups and laughed at how fancy they looked sipping champagne out of plastic. "I could get used to this," Megan said. "To what?" he asked. "A world that feels this easy." He didn't respond with words, just leaned in. Their kiss was slow, hesitant at first, then fuller, deeper. A warmth spread through her chest, joy mixed with something she had spent years protecting. Hope. Later, in his penthouse overlooking downtown San Diego, the night unfolded with a tenderness that surprised them both. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't careless. It felt like 2 people finding something they didn't know they needed. By morning, she woke to sunlight spilling across the room, and an empty space beside her. On the pillow sat a typed note. "I have to leave, but I will sort everything out." Megan held the note, feeling the shift in her heart like the end of a song she wasn't ready to stop listening to. She didn't know it then, but the moment she stepped out of that penthouse, everything in her life had already changed. The morning after the gala felt nothing like the night before. The sun filtered through Megan's apartment windows with a gentle glow, but inside her chest an uneasy stillness lingered. She held the note Theodore left on his pillow, the typed words staring back at her like a promise missing its ending. "I have to leave, but I will sort everything out." She kept rereading it, hoping it would somehow make sense on the 10th read if it didn't on the first 9. But the sentence never changed. It was too vague, too open-ended, too unfinished. Her hands trembled slightly as she folded it carefully and placed it inside her dresser drawer. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe the night they shared wasn't just a fleeting moment in his world, but the day unfolded with no calls, no texts, no updates, silence. She tried to focus on work, talking to parents at the clinic, soothing anxious toddlers, organizing checkup forms, but her mind wandered back to the feel of his hands on her waist, the way he laughed on the yacht, the sincerity in his voice when he spoke about giving back. She wondered if he was thinking about her too, or if last night had already slipped through the cracks of his busy life. 2 days later, a late afternoon appointment changed everything. Her doctor, Dr. Langford, walked in with a kind smile and a clipboard tucked under her arm. "Megan," she said warmly, "thanks for waiting. I have your results." Megan sat straight, trying to read her expression, but all she saw was a level of softness that made her pulse race. "I'll get straight to it," the doctor continued, taking a seat. "You're about 8 weeks, pregnant." Megan's breath stalled in her throat. "Pregnant?" she whispered. "Yes," the doctor confirmed gently. "Healthy, early stage, and everything looks normal so far." Megan blinked several times, her heart fluttering with a cocktail of joy and fear. Tears rushed to her eyes before she could stop them. She covered her mouth, a soft sob escaping. This wasn't bad news. It was just overwhelming. She imagined Theodore's smile. She imagined her grandmother's voice saying every child was a blessing. She imagined a tiny heartbeat growing inside her. The doctor offered a tissue. "I'll give you a moment." When the room finally felt steady again, Megan lifted her phone with shaky fingers. If Theodore meant anything he said that night, if the warmth she saw in him was real, he needed to know. She stepped outside the clinic, sitting on a bench near the parking lot where the late sun painted the pavement gold. Her hands trembled as she dialed the only number she had for him, his direct work line. She had memorized it after receiving confirmation for the gala shift. The phone rang twice, then a familiar voice answered, crisp and professional. Theodore Maxwell speaking. Just hearing him made her chest tighten. "Hello, Theodore," she said softly. There was a brief pause, not of confusion, but recognition. "Megan? Yes, it's me." He cleared his throat, tone softening. How are you?" Megan closed her eyes, steadying her breath. I need to tell you something important. Silence. Not the warm kind. The kind that built walls." She swallowed hard. "I'm pregnant." The words lingered between them, suspended in the air like something fragile and life-changing. Theodore didn't respond. She waited, thinking maybe the connection had dropped. "Theodore," she said quietly. His breath came through the line, shaky, unsteady. "This can't be," he said, voice low. "It is," she whispered. "I wouldn't lie about this." Another long silence stretched out. She imagined him standing somewhere in a sleek office, staring out giant windows, trying to process what she'd just told him. She imagined how his world must have tilted, how he wasn't the kind of man used to surprises that didn't come with headlines or profits. "Are you sure?" he finally asked, the question barely threaded together. Her eyes burned. "I heard the heartbeat today." She expected something, fear, anger, confusion, but what she heard was something colder. I don't know how to handle this. Megan, I have a lot going on. My family, my company, this isn't good timing." A tear slipped down her cheek. "It's never perfect timing," she whispered, voice cracking. "But this is real." He didn't respond. Megan clutched the phone tighter. "Theodore," she said, trying to steady her voice, "I trusted you. I opened my heart to you. And now our baby deserves the truth." He exhaled sharply, a sound full of panic and uncertainty. "Megan, I can't do this right now," he said. "I need to think. I need time." "Time," she repeated, breath trembling. "Theodore, please don't disappear. Not from this." But just as she finished her sentence, the line went silent. She stared at her phone. The call had ended. He hung up. She whispered, disbelief choking the words. She pressed her hands to her face, tears spilling freely. The joy she'd felt minutes earlier dissolved under a crushing weight of loneliness. She sat on that bench until the sun dipped below the horizon. Cars came and went. People called out to each other, but she couldn't move. Everything around her blurred. Eventually she stood on shaky legs, walked to her car, and sat in the driver's seat for several minutes, staring at the empty passenger seat. "I'll do this," she whispered to herself, wiping her tears. "I'll do this on my own if I have to." Her voice grew stronger with each breath. "For my baby." As she drove home that night, streetlights stretched across her windshield like a quiet promise. She had been alone before, and survived. But this time, she carried something worth fighting for. The night felt long, but her resolve grew roots. She would not let silence be the thing her child inherited. The weeks that followed felt like a new storm Megan had to guide herself through, quiet on the outside, demanding on the inside. After the phone call ended abruptly, she sat for hours replaying every second, wondering if she could have said something differently, something that would have kept him from disconnecting. But no matter how many times she replayed it, the ending was the same. Theodore had vanished, not with cruelty, but fear she had no choice but to stop waiting for. So she built a life around someone who never failed her, the child growing inside her. By her 3rd month, the signs of pregnancy had become gentle reminders of the life she was carrying. Morning nausea became less violent and more predictable. Appetite returned, and her energy shifted. She learned to bring crackers to work just in case her stomach protested during a clinic shift. Dr. Langford checked on her regularly, reassuring her that everything looked healthy. Some evenings, Megan stood in front of her bathroom mirror, hand resting softly on her belly, whispering small promises. "I'm here," she murmured. "You'll never feel alone." She didn't know the gender yet, but she knew the love already forming would be unconditional. Life moved forward. During the day, she continued her job as a pediatric health educator at the community clinic. Her co-workers, people who had seen her work tirelessly for children and their families, cheered her on without needing to know the full story. They didn't ask where the father was. They didn't pry. They simply offered support the way community always had. One morning, Nakia walked into the break room with a bag full of muffins. "You better eat," she said, sliding one across the table. "Doctor's orders." Megan laughed softly. "If I listen to every doctor's order, I'll gain 40 pounds by next week." "You'll gain what you need to gain," Nakia replied, sitting beside her. "Don't make me tell your grandmother." Megan's smile softened at that. Her grandmother had already become her anchor through the pregnancy, always reminding her that blessings didn't need perfect beginnings to be divine. By the time the 2nd trimester rolled in, her grandmother had turned Megan's small apartment into a haven. She brought over tiny socks, handmade blankets, and old family stories that filled their afternoons with laughter. "This child already has a village," her grandmother said one Sunday, spooning greens into a container for Megan to take home. "And a strong mother. Don't you worry about anything else." Those words held her together more than anyone knew. When baby Chris was born, cry strong, eyes wide, a tiny bundle of softness, the world around her felt full again. The delivery was smooth, the nurses kind, and the moment she held him, her chest filled with a love so powerful it erased every lingering shadow. He was everything she needed, everything she prayed for, everything she didn't know she could hold. Megan's mother came every weekend, fussing over folds in Chris's onesies and insisting his hair needed gentle brushing daily even if it was barely growing. "Teach him early," she joked. "A good man stays sharp." Their home became a warm circle of church hymns, baby giggles, and the occasional tired tears that came with sleepless nights. But even on the hardest days, when Chris cried endlessly or refused to nap, Megan knew she wouldn't trade any of it. Still, late at night, when the world around her grew silent and Chris finally drifted to sleep against her, the questions returned. Would he ever ask about his father? Would Theodore ever regret disappearing? Would she ever forgive him? She pushed these thoughts aside, focusing on the joy Chris brought into her world. The tiny hands grasping her thumb, the sweet babbles as he learned new sounds, the way he laughed when she played peekaboo. Her life found a rhythm. Mornings were a beautiful chaos of bottles, blankets, and finding clean shirts after milk spills. Days were filled with work at the clinic, where parents trusted her with concerns and children hugged her for stickers. Evenings belonged to warm baths, bedtime stories, and quiet prayers whispered into Chris's curls. "Guide me," she prayed. "Help me do right by him." It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever is. But it was full of love, as Chris grew from a newborn to a baby who could sit upright, then crawl, then toddle uncertainly toward her arms. Megan felt pride stronger than anything she had ever known. He called her Mama one evening while she fed him mashed sweet potatoes, and her heart nearly burst. Her grandmother clapped her hands with joy. "Look at him go, talking already." Megan laughed, wiping her eyes secretly. "He's my genius." Work remained steady. Parents trusted her even more because she now understood motherhood not just from textbooks, but from experience. She found joy in helping families navigate the same challenges she once feared. But every so often, someone at the clinic or grocery store or church picnic would ask, "Is Chris's father in the picture?" And Megan would offer the same simple answer, "It's just us," until one afternoon at the clinic, when the guard, Mr. Daniels, paused while checking the news ticker on his phone. "Ms. Richardson," he said slowly, "did you hear? They just announced Theodore Maxwell's divorce hearing, the final one. It's scheduled for next week." Megan froze. Her heart didn't break. It didn't tremble. It simply paused, like someone pressed a button on her chest. "Already?" she asked. "Just popped up on the news," he replied. "Big story." She nodded, forcing a smile before heading to her car with Chris tucked against her hip. Once she buckled him into his car seat, she sat behind the wheel for a long moment, gripping the steering wheel as Chris babbled softly in the back. Theodore's world was moving forward, rapidly. Hers had moved too, just in a different direction. She didn't know what she expected from hearing the news. But something inside her shifted. That evening, she called Lisa. "You going to the courthouse?" Lisa asked gently. Megan stared at the soft rise and fall of Chris's chest as he slept across her lap. "I think I have to," she whispered. "Then I'm behind you," Lisa said. "Whatever happens, you won't walk in there alone." As the sun set over San Diego, painting the sky with tints of orange and deep blue, Megan made her decision. The truth had lived quietly long enough. It was time to bring it into the light. If this journey is already touching your heart, don't forget to like this video so YouTube shares it with more people. Your support helps keep these stories alive. The courthouse steps were still buzzing as people poured out into the bright San Diego afternoon, whispering about the moment the entire courtroom had exploded with truth. Reporters rushed toward the exits, microphones held high, calling Theodore's name, trying to catch a glimpse of the baby now tied to one of the city's most powerful families. Megan had stepped aside with Chris, holding him tight against her shoulder so he could rest without the noise overwhelming him. Her heart was still beating, too fast, but she kept her shoulders straight. She hadn't come to break chaos loose. She came for the truth. And now that it was out, the world felt strangely heavier and lighter all at once. Theodore finally emerged from the courthouse doors, not as the polished billionaire who'd walked in that morning, but as a man stripped down to raw shock. His tie hung unevenly where someone had pulled at it during the chaos. His hair was slightly out of place. His steps weren't confident. They were cautious, like someone learning how to walk on unfamiliar terrain. His eyes searched until they landed on Megan. Their gazes held. Not like two people who once shared a night of warmth. Not like two strangers crossing paths, but like two people standing at the crossroads of a truth they could no longer outrun. He approached slowly. Chris shifted in Megan's arms, lifting his head in a sleepy wobble. When he saw Theodore, something sparked. His small hand lifted, reaching, familiar, instinctive. Theodore froze. The gesture wasn't forced. It wasn't uncertain. It was the kind of reach a child gave to someone who felt safe, even if they didn't know why. Megan adjusted her grip carefully. Chris leaned toward Theodore again. You want me to take him?" Theodore asked, voice quiet, almost hesitant. Megan didn't answer immediately. The memory of that phone call, the silence, the disconnection, flashed through her. She inhaled slowly. "Do you think you're ready?" she asked, her tone steady, not cold. He swallowed. "I don't know, but I want to try." It wasn't a perfect apology. It wasn't smooth or eloquent, but it was honest, and honesty mattered more now than anything else. She nodded once and shifted Chris into his arms. Theodore held the baby awkwardly at first, one hand too high, the other too low. Megan instinctively reached out and adjusted his arm. "Support him here," she said gently. He followed her guidance. When he settled Chris properly, the toddler nestled against his chest with a soft sigh. Theodore's breath caught. Chris's small hand gripped the fabric of his shirt, holding on like he'd known him his whole life. Theodore's voice wavered. I don't know what to say." Megan crossed her arms loosely over her stomach. "You don't have to say anything right now, but I should." He looked up, eyes unsure. "Megan, I handled everything badly. I didn't listen. I didn't even give you space to explain. I just panicked." She didn't soften. "Not yet. You didn't call back. I know." He looked away, guilt settling into his shoulders. "I thought I was protecting my life. my plans, my stability. I didn't think about how that choice damaged yours." Megan exhaled slowly. The apology wasn't polished, but it didn't need to be. It was real. "Chris didn't ask for any of this," she said quietly. "He deserves both parents, not a father who runs when things get hard." Theodore's face tightened. "I'm not running anymore." She studied him, the sincerity in his voice, the fear, the hope. "We'll see," she said simply. He nodded as if he expected nothing more. Chris shifted again, pulling gently at Theodore's tie. A tiny giggle escaped him, the first sound since waking, and Theodore let out a shaky laugh. "He likes me," Theodore whispered. "He doesn't know the past," Megan replied softly. "Children give people chances faster than adults do." The words hit him deeply. "I want to earn those chances," he said. She didn't reply, but she didn't turn away either. For a long moment, they stood there, the three of them, suspended between what had been and what could still be. Then a reporter shouted, "Mr. Maxwell, is that your son? Will this affect your company?" Security moved toward them quickly. Megan tensed, pulling her purse closer. "They're going to swarm you. You should go. With you," he said instinctively. She blinked. "What? I want to talk more. Away from here. Maybe walk to the fountain?" Megan hesitated. She could feel the old warmth she once knew stirring under the surface, but also the guarded caution she'd built over 2 years of silence. She lifted her chin. 5 minutes. That's it. Theodore nodded, relief flickering in his eyes. He adjusted Chris in his arms, and together they walked toward the quiet fountain at the edge of the plaza. The noise behind them faded into background chatter. Once they reached the calmer space, Theodore turned to her. "What happens now?" he asked. Megan folded her arms again. "I don't know, but whatever happens, it has to be real. No disappearing, no excuses." He swallowed hard. "I understand." She looked at Chris, peaceful, content against his father's chest. And for the first time since stepping into that courtroom, she allowed herself to feel something she'd been fighting. Maybe the past wasn't finished writing itself. Maybe this wasn't an ending. Maybe, cautiously, painfully, it was the beginning of something new. But beginnings had rules. "You want to be in his life?" she asked softly. "Yes," Theodore whispered. "Then prove it." He nodded, determination replacing uncertainty. "I will." The next morning arrived with a brightness that didn't match the heaviness in Theodore's chest. He stood in front of his bedroom mirror inside his La Jolla penthouse, attempting to knot his tie with one hand while holding Chris with the other. Chris squirmed in his arms, babbling happily, completely unaware of the emotional storm his father had gone through these past 24 hours. "You're not making this easy," Theodore muttered, trying to tighten the knot. Chris responded by tugging at the ends of the tie, giggling loudly. He sighed, but the kind of sigh blended with a chuckle. A new kind of exhaustion, a new kind of chaos, a new kind of joy. Morgan, his assistant, knocked on the open door. "Sir, your meeting starts in 30 minutes. Need me to—" He froze mid-sentence when he saw Chris. Theodore lifted the baby slightly, as if presenting a new company asset. "This is Chris. He's coming with me today." Morgan blinked. "To Maxwell Industries?" "Yes," Theodore replied, adjusting Chris on his hip. "Cancel my morning driver. I'll take the SUV. And bring an extra bag. Diapers, bottles, snacks, whatever babies need." Morgan nodded, still stunned. Right away, as Theodore carried Chris through the penthouse, Juliet's absence hung in the background like a quiet reminder, a life path that had closed in one swift moment. But he refused to dwell on it. He had a child now, a responsibility he could touch, hold, and finally acknowledge. He placed Chris gently into the car seat, tightening the straps the way Megan showed him. Chris kicked his feet, humming nonsense sounds while clutching a soft toy. "You ready?" Theodore asked. Chris squealed. "That's a yes." The drive from La Jolla to downtown San Diego had never felt longer. Theodore kept checking the rearview mirror, making sure Chris was still breathing, still strapped in correctly, still comfortable. Every small noise made him tense. Is he coughing? Is that coughing or laughing? or choking," Theodore muttered, pulling over once just to check. Chris was fine, smiling proudly at the soft toy in his hand. "Okay," Theodore exhaled. "I'm learning." When they finally arrived at Maxwell Industries, the front desk security guard nearly dropped his clipboard. "Mr. Maxwell, is that a baby?" "Yes," Theodore answered calmly. "This is Chris." The guard nodded slowly. "Well, welcome, Chris." Inside the executive elevator, Chris pressed every single button he could reach. The elevator dinged repeatedly as it opened on random floors before closing again. "This is not efficient," Theodore said under his breath. Chris giggled and clapped his hands. When the doors finally opened onto the top floor, several executives stood waiting with tablets and briefing folders. Their rehearsed greetings evaporated the moment they saw Chris. The marketing director gasped. "Oh my goodness, he's adorable." A software engineer whispered, "Look at those cheeks." Chris took this moment to introduce himself with an enthusiastic shriek. "I see you've met my son," Theodore said, adjusting him in the carrier he'd strapped on. The entire hallway fell silent. Son, not child, not the baby. Son. The word meant something. They felt it. Theodore walked into the boardroom, ignoring the stunned expressions and whispers. He placed a bottle, a small pack of wipes, and a stuffed toy beside his laptop before sitting down. Chris settled into his lap like a tiny CEO in training. The chief financial officer cleared his throat. "Shall we begin?" "Of course," Theodore said. He opened his presentation, or tried to. Chris slapped the keyboard with both hands, zooming the file to 800% and flipping the screen upside down. The room erupted into laughter. Theodore froze for a moment, then sighed. "This is not a standard business day." One of the directors leaned forward. "He's making it the best one we've had all quarter," they proceeded. Chris crawled from lap to lap, babbling and tugging on neckties. When he reached the accountant, he tapped the calculator repeatedly, causing endless beeping sounds. "Looks like he's approving our budget increase," the accountant joked. Halfway through the meeting, Chris attempted to climb onto the conference table. Theodore pulled him back, gently, whispering, "No table diving today," which only made Chris burst into laughter again. But something happened in that room, something subtle. As Chris charmed each person, the sterile boardroom softened. The executives who normally hid behind spreadsheets and charts leaned forward, smiling, laughing, engaging. And Theodore watched all of it with a strange warmth swelling inside him. He'd spent years believing leadership was about distance, perfection, control. But today, leadership felt like letting people see him as human. When the meeting ended, Denise, a young developer with a shy smile, approached him. "He's incredible," she said, brushing a tiny crumb from Chris's cheek. "You look different today, sir." "Different?" he asked. "Happier," she replied, like someone who finally found something they lost. He didn't respond, but her words stayed with him. Just before leaving, Theodore ducked into his office. He placed Chris on the sofa with two soft toys. The toddler entertained himself easily, kicking his legs and babbling as he explored the cushions. Theodore watched him, really watched him, the shape of his smile, so similar to his own baby pictures. "I should have been here from the start," he whispered. Chris looked up, lifted a toy, and tossed it toward him. It bounced off Theodore's leg. "That's fair," he said with a small laugh. "I probably deserve that." He sat on the floor beside his son, loosening his tie, letting his guard fall away. "You're going to change me," he murmured, and for once he didn't fear the change. He embraced it. When the workday ended, he lifted Chris into his arms and walked through the lobby. Employees waved at the baby. Some even took quick pictures, not of gossip but of pure delight. Theodore carried his son outside, buckled him into the SUV, and sat behind the wheel with one lingering thought. Tomorrow, he had to face Megan again. Not as the man who ran, not as the CEO who hid behind power, but as a father learning how to build something real. The morning fog lifted gently off the San Diego coastline as Megan stood outside the little seaside cafe she'd visited with her family since childhood. Its wooden sign swung softly in the breeze, the smell of pancakes and warm syrup drifting into the air. Chris rested on her hip, humming a playful tune as he squeezed the tiny stuffed bear he carried everywhere. Today was different. Today Theodore was coming. Megan didn't know what to expect, not from him, not from her family, and not from her own heart. She only knew that this breakfast needed to happen. If Theodore truly wanted a place in Chris's life, her family had to see him for themselves. She glanced toward the parking lot, nervousness tingling in her chest. The SUV pulled in quietly. Theodore stepped out wearing a light button-down shirt, sleeves rolled, casual but still unmistakably polished. He hesitated before closing the car door, taking a breath as if bracing himself for judgment. Then he saw Chris. A smile fought its way into his expression before he could stop it. Chris reached both arms toward him, bouncing excitedly. Megan swallowed. "You ready for this?" "No," Theodore admitted honestly, "but I'm here." She appreciated that answer more than he knew. He lifted Chris effortlessly. The toddler squealed in delight, gripping Theodore's collar before babbling something that sounded like da-da-da. Megan stiffened slightly, not ready to process that. But Theodore's eyes missed it. Inside the cafe, her family was already gathered around a long table near the window. The sunlight filtered through, casting a warm glow over plates piled with biscuits, bacon, and fruit. Her mother sat at the head of the table, adjusting silverware as if preparing for battle. Nakia waved enthusiastically. "There he is, the mysterious man." Megan gave her a look. "Behave." "No promises," Nakia whispered back, smirking. The cafe was cozy and familiar, with chalkboard menus and the low hum of morning conversations. When Theodore stepped inside, every eye at the table turned toward him. He froze, just briefly, then straightened his shoulders. Megan's mother stood slowly. Her judgment was not harsh, but observant, sharp, the kind that evaluated a person's character in seconds. "You must be Theodore," she said. "Yes, ma'am." He shifted Chris slightly, offering a nervous smile. "Thank you for having me." She studied him a moment longer. Then her expression softened. Not much, but enough. "Well," she said, "any man holding my grandbaby that securely deserves at least a seat at the table." Laughter rippled around them, easing the tension. Theodore exhaled as if he'd passed his first exam. They sat. Chris went straight into Megan's mother's arms, babbling proudly as if showing off his da-da-da trick. She kissed his cheek and rocked him gently before setting him into the high chair beside her. "So," Nakia began, leaning forward with a mischievous grin, "Mr. Maxwell, you survived a courtroom explosion yesterday and still showed up for breakfast." "That's impressive." Theodore chuckled nervously. "I figured facing family was easier than facing reporters." Nakia raised her brows. "Oh, honey, you've clearly never faced a black mama with questions." The table erupted in laughter. Megan hid her smile behind a sip of orange juice. Her mother placed a plate of eggs in front of Theodore. "Eat. You look like you've been running through life without food." "Thank you," he said earnestly. I haven't had much of an appetite lately." "That's what guilt does," Nakia muttered under her breath. Megan shot her a look. "I said behave." "What?" "I'm just saying," Nakia whispered. Theodore didn't flinch. Instead, he nodded. "She's right." The honesty caught Megan off guard. Her mother folded her hands. "Tell us what you plan to do now." Theodore met her gaze directly, not with bravado, but sincerity. "I want to be a father to Chris. Not when it's convenient, not when it's easy. Every day. I can't change the past, but I can take responsibility now." Megan's mother didn't respond immediately. Instead, she passed Chris a piece of cut-up pancake. The toddler clapped as the syrup stuck to his fingers. "Words are easy," her mother finally said. "Consistency isn't." "I know," Theodore replied quietly, "but I'm ready to show up." Nakia leaned in again. "So if Chris wakes up at 2 a.m. screaming, you're showing up then too?" He nodded. "Yes. What about when he gets sick? I'll be there. When he throws food at your face?" "That already happened," Theodore said, wiping syrup from his sleeve. Laughter spread through the table again. Even Megan cracked a smile she didn't intend to show. The breakfast continued with unexpected ease. Her aunt asked questions about his work schedule. Her mother asked about his upbringing. Nakia peppered him with playful jabs until he loosened enough to tease back. The tension melted as Chris banged a spoon rhythmically on the table, contributing his own commentary. At one point, Megan glanced sideways and saw Theodore watching Chris eat, eyes soft, almost disbelieving. She whispered, "You okay?" He nodded, just proud. Something warm flickered in her chest. As plates emptied and coffee cups refilled, her family began sharing stories, embarrassing stories about Megan's childhood, including the time she tried to bake cookies with salt instead of sugar. She cried for 2 hours, Nakia added, laughing. Megan groaned. Why is that still a story? Theodore leaned toward her. So you cried over cookies. Don't judge me. I'm not, he said softly. I'm learning, and somehow. Those 2 words meant more than a dozen apologies. When breakfast ended, her mother hugged Theodore. Your mistakes don't erase your chances, she whispered. But don't waste the new ones. He swallowed hard. I won't, ma'am. Outside, the ocean breeze brushed their faces as they walked toward the parking lot. Chris was back in Theodore's arms, patting his chest with contentment. Megan stood beside them, folding her arms gently. I didn't expect you to survive my family, she joked lightly. I barely did, he replied, but I'm glad you invited me. She looked at the way Chris curled into him, peaceful and trusting. Maybe, just maybe, there was room for hope. If this journey has touched your heart, don't forget to like this video. It helps more people find these powerful life stories. The morning sun shone bright over them. 3 people navigating something fragile, something new, something possible. The morning after the seaside breakfast arrived with the kind of quiet that made Megan pause at her kitchen window. The sky stretched wide and pale blue, sunlight reflecting gently across the neighborhood rooftops. She could still hear echoes of yesterday, her family laughing, Chris banging a spoon, and Theodore watching their son with a look she'd never seen on him before. A look of possibility. Now she stood with Chris on her hip, diaper bag packed, waiting in her living room as Theodore's SUV pulled into the parking lot below. Chris squealed instantly. Da-da-da! Megan sighed softly. We'll talk about that nickname later, she murmured, but she couldn't deny the way it tugged at her heart. A knock sounded, firm, familiar, but tentative. She opened the door. Theodore stood there holding a small backpack decorated with cartoon animals. I bought him a few things, just in case. She tried not to smile. You didn't have to. Yes, I did, he said quietly. I'm learning. The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. She stepped aside, and he entered slowly, eyes scanning the cozy living room filled with baby blocks, picture books, and the faint scent of lavender detergent. Chris reached for him immediately. Theodore lifted him into his arms, still slightly awkward but far more confident than before. Chris tapped his cheek and giggled. So, Megan said, adjusting her keys, ready for your first full co-parent morning? He took a shaky breath. I think so. I want to be. She nodded. Let's start small, a walk around the park, then maybe the grocery store, and you'll handle the stroller today. The stroller, he repeated like someone preparing for battle. Parents filled the walking path, moms pushing strollers, dads chasing toddlers, grandparents tossing breadcrumbs at pigeons. Children's laughter floated in the air like music. Megan handed Theodore the stroller. Here, strap him in. It took him 3 tries. Strap too loose, strap too tight. Strap stuck behind Chris's leg. Finally, Chris sat properly, kicking his feet excitedly. Success, Theodore declared. Megan smirked. Barely. They walked together down the path, the stroller wheels squeaking faintly. For a few minutes, neither spoke. The silence wasn't hostile. It felt like 2 people cautiously stepping into a shared rhythm. Chris babbled constantly, pointing at ducks, leaves, and people jogging past. You know, Theodore said softly, I used to walk through life like everything was a race. Everything had to be done fast, efficient, perfect. Megan nodded but kept her eyes forward. But this, he gestured to the stroller, slows me down. In a good way. I didn't realize how much I needed that. She felt a small tug in her chest. Co-parenting isn't about perfection, it's about presence. He looked at her. I want to be present. Every day. Megan didn't offer reassurance. She wanted to believe him, but belief takes time. Instead, she said, then keep showing up. I will, he answered quietly. The automatic doors slid open, greeting them with cold air and faint music. Megan grabbed a basket while Theodore lifted Chris into the child seat of the cart, Is he supposed to sit this much? Theodore asked. He'll survive 20 minutes, she replied, handing Chris a teething toy to keep him busy. At first, everything went well. Theodore pushed the cart carefully. Megan grabbed fruits and breakfast items. Then Chris spotted apples. Bright, red, stackable. He wanted them. Chris smacked both hands on the cart handle and shouted, "Da-da-da! Ah!" Theodore panicked. He wants the apples. What do I do? Calm down, Megan said, holding back laughter. Give him one to hold. Theodore handed Chris an apple. Chris threw it. It rolled dramatically across the floor. An older man looked startled. Theodore's face turned red. I'll get it. He chased the apple through a maze of carts while Chris squealed with delight. When he returned, apple rescued, Megan was laughing for real now. Welcome to parenthood. It's messy. His cheeks softened. Messy I can handle. They continued down the aisle, and somehow the awkwardness between them began to melt. Not completely, but enough to show this could work. Back at her apartment, Megan set Chris on the floor with toy cars while she unpacked groceries. Theodore crouched beside the toddler, teaching him how to roll the cars across the carpet. Chris giggled, crawling after each one. You're good with him, she admitted. He didn't look up. I'm trying. I know that doesn't erase the past. It's not about erasing the past, she said softly. It's about rewriting the future. Theodore slowly lifted his head. Their eyes met, a quiet moment suspended between them. Thank you for letting me try, he whispered. Megan didn't respond immediately. She sat beside them, picking up a toy car and rolling it gently across the carpet. This is what Shio parenting looks like, she said. Small moments that build trust. He nodded. Then I'll protect every one of them. For the first time, she believed he meant it. Theodore stayed for lunch. Nothing fancy, just grilled cheese sandwiches and cut fruit. Yet he treated it like the most important meal he'd ever had. Chris sat in his high chair, making energetic attempts to feed himself. Half the food ended up on the tray. The other half ended up on Theodore's shirt. Megan laughed. You'll need a stain remover. Theodore looked down at the smear of mashed banana. Consider it a badge of honor. It was such a normal moment, so ordinary, so human. When they finished, Theodore helped clean dishes, drying plates while Megan washed. Their arms brushed a few times, soft, unplanned, sending tiny ripples that neither acknowledged aloud. But they felt it, both of them. When it was time for him to leave, Chris clung to Theodore's shirt, refusing to let go. I'll be back, buddy, he whispered, pressing a gentle kiss to his head. I promise. He handed Chris to Megan but lingered at the door. This was a good day, he said softly. A real day. She nodded. Yes. It was. I want more days like this, he added, voice awkward but honest. For him, and maybe for us. Megan inhaled slowly. One day at a time. He accepted that answer with a small smile. As he walked down the stairs, Chris crawled to the window, pressing his hand against the glass and watching him go. Megan picked him up, holding him close. Maybe, she whispered into Chris's curls, this time, things can unfold the right way. The sky over San Diego dimmed into warm streaks of gold and soft orange when Theodore arrived at Megan's apartment for his evening time with Chris. The air carried the coolness of late afternoon, and as he walked up the stairs, he felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest, a mix of hope, fear, and something deeper he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. He paused outside her door. They had spent the past week learning to co-parent, walks, meals, short visits, carefully building a new rhythm. But tonight was different. Tonight wasn't just about routines or schedules. Tonight was about truth. He knocked gently. Megan opened the door wearing a soft beige sweater, her curls loosely tucked behind her ears. Chris toddled around her legs, squealing when he recognized his father. Theodore automatically bent down, catching the toddler as he ran into his arms. Hey, little man, he murmured, pressing a small kiss to Chris's cheek. Chris giggled and buried his face into Theodore's shoulder. Megan watched him quietly. Something in the way she watched him, not cold, not angry, not confused, but quietly studying, told Theodore that she was preparing for a conversation they could no longer avoid. Come in, she said softly. The living room lights glowed warmly, and the air smelled faintly of cinnamon from the candle on the table. Toys were scattered neatly across the carpet, and Chris's favorite car lay near the sofa. Theodore set Chris down, and the toddler immediately grabbed the toy car and zoomed it across the floor with excited babbles. The adults sat opposite each other, a few feet apart, but feeling like a world of unspoken words sat between them. Megan folded her hands. "We need to talk, Theodore." "I know," he replied, voice low. For a brief moment, neither spoke. Chris filled the silence with joyful squeals, crashing his toy into a stack of blocks. Both parents watched him, gathering their breath. Finally, Megan looked up. Her voice was calm but steady. "Why did you disappear?" "After the gala, after that night, after I called." He swallowed hard. "I've replayed that call in my head 1,000 times, and I still hate the way I handled it. But you didn't just handle it badly," she said. "You abandoned us." The words stung, not cruelly but truthfully. He leaned forward. "I was scared." "Of what?" she asked, her brow tightening. "Me? No," he said immediately. "Of myself." Megan blinked, thrown off by the honesty. Theodore exhaled slowly. "You saw a version of me that didn't exist anywhere else. Not in my company, not in my home, not even with Juliet." He clasped his hands together, shoulders tense. "At the gala, on that yacht, with you, I wasn't the CEO. I wasn't the man people expected me to be. I was just me. And I liked that feeling so much it terrified me." Megan's throat tightened. She hadn't expected that. He continued, "When you told me you were pregnant, I panicked. Not because I didn't want the baby, but because I didn't believe I was capable of being the kind of father you needed me to be." Megan looked down at her lap, blinking back the sting in her eyes. "I wasn't raised in a warm home," Theodore whispered. "Love wasn't something we practiced. Responsibility meant money, authority, control, but connection." He laughed softly, without humor. "That was never a part of the blueprint." She looked up slowly. "That's not an excuse." "I know," he said. "It's the truth, a truth I should have faced sooner." A quiet settled between them, the kind that happens when two people finally stop running from the conversation they've avoided for years. Then Chris lifted his car high above his head, dropped it intentionally, and yelled, "Dada!" Both adults froze. Megan blinked. Theodore swallowed hard. Chris toddled to him, tugging his pant leg as he repeated, smiling wide, "Dada!" Theodore's chest cracked open. Emotion hit him so fast his breath stuttered. He leaned down, scooping Chris into his arms, and the toddler wrapped his little arms around his father's neck, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Theodore closed his eyes. A single tear escaped, then another. He pressed his forehead gently against his son's hair. "Hey, buddy," he whispered, voice breaking. "I'm here." Megan's breath caught. She had never seen him like this. Not in a gala room, not in a courthouse, not during CO parenting moments. This was a man unraveling in the quietest, most honest way possible, breaking open not from pain but from love he'd never allowed himself to feel. When Theodore lifted his head again, tears streaked down his face. He didn't hide them. "I don't deserve that word yet," he said, voice rough, "but I want to. I want to earn it. Every day." Megan's heart twisted. Part of her wanted to protect herself. Part of her wanted to stay guarded. Part of her wanted to believe him. But another part, the part that remembered the warmth of his hands on her waist at the gala, the way he held her gently that night, the note that hinted at a man struggling more than he admitted, softened. She wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. "I was angry at you for a long time. You had every right to be. I raised Chris alone. Every milestone, every night he cried, every doctor visit." She inhaled shakily. "But I never wanted to erase you. I just needed you to care." He leaned forward. "I care now. I care so much it scares me again, but I'm not running this time." Chris patted his father's face with both hands, giggling. Theodore laughed through the tears and pulled him closer. "You saved me, little man. You don't even know it." Megan watched them, watched her son touch a part of Theodore that no money or success had ever reached. She didn't reach across the couch. She didn't kiss him. She didn't do anything grand. She simply whispered, "We can try again." Not as a couple, not yet, but as two people who want what's best for him. Theodore nodded immediately. "I can handle that. I want that." Their eyes met, not full of romance, not yet, but full of something stronger. Chris nestled between them, babbling as if he approved. And for the first time in a long time, Megan allowed herself to feel something she had buried. Hope. The days following their emotional conversation unfolded more gently than Megan expected. Nothing dramatic happened. No sudden confessions, no sweeping gestures, no promises rushed into existence. Instead, something quieter grew, a rhythm, a real one, the kind that didn't need to be forced, polished, or named, only lived. It began on a Tuesday morning when Theodore knocked on the door at exactly 9 a.m., holding a small stack of children's books instead of a briefcase. Chris squealed and crawled toward him before Megan even reached the door. "You brought books?" she asked. He nodded, slightly bashful. "I thought we could start a morning routine, story time before his nap." She blinked, pleasantly surprised. "That's thoughtful." "I'm learning," he said softly. Those 3 words had become a quiet refrain in his days now, not an excuse, a truth. They sat on the living room floor. Chris nestled into the crook of Theodore's arm while Megan sat beside them, watching the scene unfold. Theodore opened a picture book and began to read. His deep voice softened into something warm, relaxed, steady. Chris listened, truly listened, his tiny fingers tracing the illustrations while his father narrated. After a few minutes, Chris leaned his head against Theodore's chest. Megan swallowed gently. There was nothing more tender than watching a man become a father in real time. When the story ended, Theodore closed the book and whispered, "That was good, right?" as if the toddler might give him a full review. Chris clapped twice. "That's a yes," Megan said, smiling. She didn't notice Theodore watching her out of the corner of his eye, watching the way her smile softened her whole face, the way her shoulders relaxed around him now. Not fully open, but no longer closed. By Thursday, they took Chris to the beach. Barefoot in the sand, Chris stomped with the determination of a tiny explorer. The water lapped gently near the shore, and the sun warmed their skin. Theodore followed behind, arms outstretched like a safety net. "Slow down, buddy," he laughed. "You're not surfing yet." Megan watched them from a few steps away, letting the ocean breeze wrap around her. She hadn't realized how heavy the past 2 years had been until she saw moments like this. Chris with both parents, not in conflict but in harmony. She crouched down to help Chris build the sand castle. Theodore knelt beside them, patting the sand awkwardly. "You're doing it wrong," she teased. "There's a wrong way to pat sand." "Yes," she deadpanned. "You're doing it." He chuckled, shaking his head. "Then teach me." She took his hand, gently, guiding it over the mound of sand. Their fingers brushed, lingering just long enough for both of them to feel it. Her hand slipped away first. Neither spoke about it. They didn't need to. Chris suddenly squealed, pointing up at a seagull. "Da!" Theodore's heart melted instantly. "Yes, that's a bird, not quite da-da, but I'll take it." This laughter, shared effort, imperfect parenting felt real. Not a fantasy, not a forced family picture, a beginning. Friday night came with an invitation Megan didn't expect to give or feel ready for. "Do you want to stay for dinner?" she asked, voice softer than she intended. Theodore blinked. "Are you sure?" Her eyes flickered to Chris, who banged a spoon against his high chair tray. "He seems to want you here." "I want to be here too," he said quietly, so he stayed. Megan cooked pasta with sautéed vegetables, and Theodore stood nearby, trying not to burn the garlic bread. "You're watching it too closely," she teased. "It won't cook faster out of fear." "I disagree," he said, turning the slice over dramatically. "Bread is sensitive." She laughed, a real laugh, warm enough to fill the kitchen. They sat at the table like it was the most natural thing in the world. Chris kicked his feet while eating pieces of soft noodles. Theodore helped wipe his hands. Megan poured juice. At one point, Chris leaned toward Theodore and placed a small noodle in his father's hand. "He's sharing with you," Megan said, touched. Theodore stared at the noodle as if it were a priceless gift. "This is an honor." She shook her head, smiling. "You're dramatic. It's an important noodle," he insisted. Chris giggled, dropping another noodle onto Theodore's lap. Dinner took twice as long with all the giggles, spills, and tiny interruptions, but neither adult minded. For once, time didn't feel rushed. It felt right. Later, when dishes were washed and Chris was getting sleepy, Megan settled him in her lap with a warm blanket. Theodore sat beside them, close but respectful, watching as the toddler's eyes fluttered. Megan hummed softly, an old lullaby her mother used to sing. Theodore leaned slightly toward the sound, something inside him softening. "He loves your voice," he whispered. Chris's tiny hand gripped her sweater. "He loves yours too," she replied softly. "You don't hear it the same way, but he reacts to you. He knows you." Theodore swallowed the rising emotion. "That means everything." Megan looked down at Chris, then at Theodore, at the man who used to be a stranger to parenthood, now sitting next to her with a longing he didn't try to hide. A quiet truth formed in her chest. He was changing, and she could feel herself changing too. Not blindly, not foolishly, but carefully. Healing wasn't linear, but this felt like the first easy breath after years of holding her lungs tight. When Chris finally fell asleep, Theodore stood slowly. "I should go," he whispered. Megan nodded, walking him to the door. At the doorway, something paused between them. "Today was good," he said softly. "Really good." "It was," she admitted. "I'd like more days like this." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "So would I." Theodore stepped out, offering a small smile that reached his eyes. "Good night, Megan." "Good night, Theodore." The door closed gently. Megan leaned her back against it, exhaling a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding, a breath full of relief, hesitation, warmth, and something she refused to name just yet. But she felt it. A new rhythm, a new joy, a new possibility. If this chapter has touched your heart, please like this video. Your support helps this channel keep bringing powerful stories to life. The San Diego coastline stretched wide and peaceful, the late afternoon sun dipping toward the horizon. Golden light brushed the sand, turning each grain into something soft and warm. The waves rolled in gentle rhythms as if blessing the evening with calm. Megan walked barefoot along the beach, the hem of her sundress brushing her calves, while Chris toddled in front of her, chasing the foam that fizzled across the shore. Theodore stood a few steps back, holding a picnic basket and watching them. Something inside him tightened, not in fear, but in recognition. For years he had measured his life in contracts, deadlines, board meetings, and shareholder calls. But now, watching Chris splash water onto his own legs and squeal, then run straight back to Megan for balance, he understood. Something he never had before. This was what a life should feel like. "Careful, little man." Megan laughed as Chris stumbled back toward her. She scooped him up, kissing his cheek. The light wind tugged at her curls, and she tucked a strand behind her ear. Theodore took the last few steps toward them, smiling as Chris reached both arms out. "Dada," Chris chirped, grabbing the collar of Theodore's shirt. Megan looked between them, warmth filling her eyes. "He doesn't hesitate anymore," she said softly. "No," Theodore whispered, lifting Chris. "I won't ever give him a reason to—" They spread out the soft blanket Theodore brought, navy blue with white stripes, right near the waterline but far enough to stay dry. The sunset cast streaks of pink and amber across the sky. As they sat, the world felt hushed, like time was holding its breath. Theodore unpacked the basket, setting out fruit, sandwiches, and a small carton of chocolate milk for Chris. The little boy crawled onto the blanket, giggling as he reached for the strawberries first. Megan watched the scene play out, heart swelling at how natural this felt, the three of them together. "You've gotten really good at this picnic thing," she teased. Theodore laughed under his breath. "I've been practicing. I wanted today to be right." She tilted her head. "Why today?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached out and brushed a crumb off Chris's chin. Then he looked at her with a gaze packed with meaning. Not guilt, not hesitation, not fear, just clarity. "Because," he began slowly, "we've spent weeks learning each other again, not as strangers, not as people with a painful past, but as a family stepping forward one honest day at a time." Megan swallowed, her throat tightening unexpectedly. "Theodore," he shook his head gently. "Let me say this." She nodded. "I spent so long being terrified of failing you, failing him, failing myself. I hid behind work because I didn't know how to hold something fragile without breaking it. But you—" His voice softened. "You taught me what actually matters. You showed me a love that didn't come from luxury or status or expectations. A love that was real, the kind that doesn't disappear just because life gets complicated." Chris crawled into his lap, gripping a small seashell. Theodore picked it up and handed it to Megan. He found this earlier, Theodore said. I kept it because it reminded me of us, something shaped high pressure but still beautiful. Megan held the shell in her palm, tracing its ridges. You always knew how to say things that went straight to the heart. He let out a small, nervous laugh, a rare vulnerability from a man who once ruled rooms with confidence. I'm trying to say everything the right way, because you deserve that. The waves hushed again, rolling closer. Then Theodore shifted Chris gently onto the blanket and reached into the picnic basket. When his hand emerged, he wasn't holding food. He was holding a small wooden box. Megan's breath hitched. Theodore, he sank to one knee, not dramatic, not loud, but deeply sincere. The setting sun framed him in soft gold as he took her hand. Megan, he said, voice steady but overflowing with emotion, the day you walked into that courtroom, everything inside me changed, not because of fear, but because seeing you there holding Chris, I realized that the life I had been chasing was empty without the two of you in it. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. I can't undo the past, he continued. I can't erase the hurt I caused, but I can build a future that honors every truth we've learned, every step we've taken, every moment we've fought through. I love you. I love our son, and I want to spend my life proving that to both of you. He opened the wooden box. Inside was a simple, elegant gold ring, classic, real, heartfelt. Megan Richardson, he whispered, will you marry me? Chris, sensing the shift, clambered into Megan's lap and clapped his hands together, his giggles filling the quiet air. Megan's eyes glossed with tears she couldn't hold back. The weight of everything, heartbreak, resilience, rebuilding, landed all at once, but it didn't overwhelm her. It felt like release, like a new door opening. Yes, she breathed, her voice trembling yet certain. Of course, yes. Theodore closed his eyes briefly in relief, placing the ring gently on her finger. Megan leaned forward, pulling him into a soft, tearful embrace while Chris squeezed both of them, babbling happily. Under the deepening sky, the three of them held on to each other, a family no longer broken but rising. The waves moved around them, steady and reassuring, as if marking the beginning of something whole. Their future had just changed shape, and it was brighter than any of them had ever imagined. The celebration began the moment Megan opened the door to her apartment that evening. Warm light spilled from every corner of the living room, where family and church friends had already gathered, filling the space with laughter, familiar scents, and the kind of joy that could only come from people who had prayed for this moment long before it arrived. Look at them. Someone cheered as Theodore and Megan stepped in with Chris perched on Theodore's hip. Oh, honey, that ring is sparkling, another woman shouted from near the dining table, waving a fan dramatically. You said yes. I knew God was working on this. Megan's mother nearly danced in place before rushing over. The room buzzed with life, a little chaotic, a little loud but full of heart. Platters of fried chicken, cornbread, sweet potato rolls, peach cobbler, and fresh-cut fruit covered the table. Gospel music played softly from a speaker in the corner. Children ran around playing tag. Aunties crowded near the kitchen, whispering and pointing playfully at Theodore as if he couldn't hear them. That warmth, that vibrant black community energy, where love was cooked, spoken, sung, and lived, wrapped around the whole evening. Megan's mother hugged her daughter tightly, then pulled back to wipe a tear. You deserve every ounce of happiness, baby girl, she whispered, cupping her cheek. Megan nodded, overwhelmed. Thank you, Mama. Then her mother turned toward Theodore, giving him the kind of look only a protective mother could deliver. Firm, intentional, full of meaning. You better take good care of my daughter and grandson, she said. No disappearing acts, no running from blessings. Theodore straightened his posture, holding Chris a little closer. I promise you, he replied softly. I won't ever run again. Something in his voice made her expression soften. She reached out and patted his arm. Good. Now come get some food before the kids finish everything. Laughter rippled around them again. An hour into the celebration, the room was a swirl of conversation. Plates clinked, music played, and people moved from group to group sharing stories. Theodore, usually reserved at social gatherings, found himself at ease. Each time someone asked him a question about Chris or Megan, he answered with a smile that came from a real place, not corporate training, not charm, but genuine warmth. Someone passed Chris a small toy hammer from the play bin. The little boy held it up proudly and tapped it gently against the coffee table. Everyone chuckled. But when Megan's mother stood to make a toast holding her sparkling cider glass high, Chris saw his moment. She popped the cork of the cider bottle, a soft pop, and Chris, with perfect comedic timing, smacked his plastic hammer on the table to imitate the sound. Pop! The whole room jumped, then erupted into laughter. "The baby said he's part of the celebration too," one of the aunties shouted, wiping tears from her eyes. Even Theodore doubled over, holding his stomach, trying not to spill the sweet tea he was drinking. "He's got timing," he gasped. Megan scooped Chris into her arms. "Lord, this child," she said through laughter. Chris beamed, unaware of the chaos he caused, but thrilled at the applause that followed. When everyone settled, Megan's mother lifted her glass again. "To truth," she said. "To second chances," the room echoed. "And to love that grows stronger when it's given the space to heal," she finished. People clinked glasses. Theodore reached over and gently squeezed Megan's hand. They shared a look, quiet and full of gratitude. Later, after plates were cleared, children were dozing on pillows, and the crowd had thinned. Megan and Theodore stepped outside for air. The night breeze carried traces of ocean salt and the faint hum of the city settling down. They stood on the small balcony, lights from other apartment windows twinkling around them. The moon hung low, washing everything in silver. Megan leaned against the railing, letting her shoulders relax. "Tonight felt good," she said quietly. Theodore stepped beside her, fingers brushing hers. "It felt right," he replied. "Being with your family, seeing Chris in the middle of everything, watching you laugh." He paused, searching for the right words. "It reminded me how much I almost lost." "You're here now," Megan said. "That's what matters." He looked out toward the distant shoreline. "I used to think strength was about controlling everything, but the strongest moments I've ever lived, they happened when I let go of fear." Megan turned to him. "And the most healing moments I've lived came when I allowed myself to hope again." He exhaled softly, the tension of past months melting from his expression. "You know," Megan added with a quiet smile, "I was scared earlier today, scared of rushing into something. But when I saw you on one knee, I didn't feel fear. I felt peace." Theodore reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers. "I want our future to be built on that. Peace, honesty, family." She rested her head on his shoulder. "We're learning. All of us." Chris peeked from inside the apartment, rubbing his eyes and holding the toy hammer loosely in his hand. "Dada," he murmured sleepily. Theodore lifted him gently. "Come here, buddy." Chris curled against his chest with a soft sigh. Megan watched them, father and son, bonded now in a way she once feared would never happen, and her heart filled to the brim. "We're really doing this, huh?" she whispered. "We are," Theodore said. One day at a time, the three of them stood together on the balcony, wrapped in moonlight, wrapped in hope, wrapped in something new and steady. Something that felt like home. Morning sunlight drifted across the shoreline, painting soft ripples on the quiet waves. The sand was cool beneath their feet, still damp from the night tide. Megan walked slowly, letting her toes sink into the smooth surface while Chris toddled ahead, leaving tiny footprints beside her own. Theodore followed closely, carrying Chris's little beach bucket and a towel slung over his shoulder. The world felt peaceful in a way that didn't need explanation. The kind of peace that settles in after long storms, when the heart finally believes that joy can stay. Chris squealed as a small wave rolled toward him. Megan hurried forward, laughing. "Not too close, sweetheart," she called, scooping him up before the water reached his ankles. Theodore joined them, brushing a curl from Chris's forehead. "He's ready to swim before he can pronounce half his words," he joked. Megan smiled. "Runs in the family, apparently. Someone else I know dove headfirst into big decisions." He chuckled quietly, taking her hand. "And someone else saved me from drowning in old habits." There was no tension now, no lingering uncertainty, only a growing certainty that the three of them were exactly where they were meant to be. They continued walking, letting Chris wiggle down again so he could chase a stray seashell. A group of joggers passed by, offering warm smiles when they noticed the toddler's excited babbling. Nearby, a family flew a bright red kite that dipped and spun in the gentle wind. The world seemed full of simple joy, Theodore watched Chris explore, stopping to examine every pebble and shell. He notices everything, he said softly. Megan nodded. He gets that from you. Observant, curious. Maybe, Theodore said, his voice warm, but he gets his heart from you. She looked at him, touched by the sincerity in his expression. He'd grown into fatherhood, with determination, fumbling at first, learning fast and never giving up. There was a steadiness to him now that hadn't existed before, something shaped by choosing love over fear. Chris held up a broken shell proudly. Mama! Megan crouched beside him. That's beautiful, baby. Theodore bent down too. Can I see? Chris placed it in his palm, and Theodore held it as gently as if it were complete. Still special, he murmured. Megan glanced at him, recognizing the meaning beneath the words. Everything can be made whole, she said. Their eyes met. For a moment, the sound of waves faded as the weight of their journey. The courtroom, the distance, the rebuilding, gathered in the space between them. Then it softened into gratitude. They settled on the same navy blanket Theodore had used during the proposal. It now felt like part of their story, a small symbol of a turning point. Megan set out sandwiches, apple slices, and juice boxes, while Theodore helped Chris settle with his toys. Chris giggled as he tried stacking small sand molds. Every time he toppled them, Theodore lifted him under the arms and spun him gently, earning a squeal of delight. You're really good at this, Megan said as she passed Theodore a sandwich. He took it, smiling. I'm learning, and I'm enjoying every second. She lay back on the blanket, closing her eyes briefly as the sunlight warmed her skin. When she opened them, she saw Theodore watching her, not with uncertainty, but with a deep, calm affection. What? She asked softly. He shook his head. I'm just grateful. For this, for you, for him. Megan's heart swelled, not because he spoke perfectly, but because every word sounded honest. As Chris played beside them, Theodore reached for Megan's hand. You know, he began quietly, I used to think love was supposed to be flawless, easy, predictable. He paused. But real love, it requires courage and honesty, and trying again even when you're afraid. Megan listened closely. I made mistakes, he continued. Mistakes that hurt you, mistakes that left you carrying burdens alone. But I want to spend the rest of my life making sure you never carry anything alone again. Not your fears, not your dreams, not our son's future. She squeezed his fingers. We've both grown, she said gently. Pain changes you, but healing changes you too. He nodded. And I want to choose healing. Every day. With you. She leaned forward and kissed him, a soft, meaningful kiss that tasted of new beginnings and quiet certainty. When they pulled apart, Chris climbed into their laps, wrapping his small arms around both their necks. Their laughter intertwined with the sound of waves. Family, real, whole, and unbroken, was settling into place. They stayed on the beach until the sun began to tip westward. The breeze cooled, and families started packing up. But Megan, Theodore, and Chris remained, savoring every last drop of the peaceful afternoon. As they finally stood to leave, the narrator's voice rose gently. Life has a way of teaching us that truth may shake everything we've built, but it can also rebuild what was meant to last. Megan found courage in honesty. Theodore found strength in vulnerability, and together they discovered that family is not just formed by blood, but by choosing each other through every season. The camera follows the three of them walking toward the boardwalk. Chris held high on Theodore's shoulders, Megan beside them, fingers interlocked with a man she once feared she'd lost forever. Their laughter carries with the wind. Their footprints trail behind them on the sand. Their future stretches wide and bright. If this journey moved you, please like this video, comment your favorite moment, and subscribe to Mr. Graham Stories. Your support helps us share more powerful stories just like this. Sometimes love doesn't return in a straight line, but it returns exactly when the heart is ready to receive it.